All right, welcome back to the first part of the two-lecture series in the Phylum Arthropods, or Arthropoda. For those living in the southeast region, especially here in Tennessee, I feel like it's very important to kind of know some of the more dangerous or venomous, poisonous insects, arthropods, snakes, etc. So one that's most commonly mistaken around the parts where we live here in Tennessee is the brown recluse. And the easiest way to identify the brown recluse is by looking at the cephalothorax here, so where the head and thorax is combined. You notice this little bitty, looks like a brown fiddle on the back of the cephalothorax. So very the distinguishing mark there of the brown recluse is this little brown fiddle. This very mistakenly common mistake for like field spiders, brown spiders, these little jumping spiders. In general, people kind of freak out about spiders, but for here in the southwest or southeast, there's only really two spiders that we have to worry about. This is one, and the black widow is the other. For the most part, everything else may look scary. Don't freak out. Again, these guys here are the only ones, and that and the black widow are the only ones that can really kind of hurt us. So just a little general site ID and information about it. So our objectives for today is basically the following here. We're going to describe characteristics of arthropods in this video, figure out why they are so successful, being that this is the most successful phylum in the animal kingdom. And then we're going to begin to look at the major groups of arthropods. So there are 6 major groups in there. We'll cover 2 in this video and leave the remaining 4 for the second part. Okay. So, again, incredibly diverse and successful phylum, the arthropods. So it's more than just insects, as you can see here in the picture. So looking at our phylogenetic tree, going back to the laser pointer here. So looking at the arthropods here, the nearest of kin are, honestly, interestingly enough, the roundworms, the nematodes, and they're both shared by a synapomorphy or a derived characteristic of periodic molting. So if you've seen cicadas or anything of insect skin or husk, you know what I'm talking about with this molting aspect. So with arthropods, what separates arthropods from roundworms in particular are the jointed appendages. Remember, roundworms are not segmented, and their exoskeleton does have this segmentation. So their name literally means jointed foot. And again, largest phylum, 900,000 species. That's really child's play. It's estimated that just in beetles alone, that there's over 1 million species. Right now, there's over 400,000 species of just beetles alone. So I used to study a particular type of beetles, weevils, when I was back in grad school. Insects, spiders, crustaceans, scorpions, ticks, all of these are examples of arthropods. Absolutely incredibly ecologically diverse. Essentially, they are on land, earth, water. I mean, they are everywhere. If there is a plant on this planet, there is probably some type of arthropod eating it, from Antarctica to the tropics, ocean floor, you name it, they're there. So this body plan, this exoskeleton, jointed appendages, this body plan goes back to the Cambrian explosion. So back in our evolutionary unit there, so roughly 550 million years ago. And believe it or not, this body plan has been so successful that very little variation is still there from segment to segment. So looking at this fossil of a trilobite there. So again, trilobites are extinct, but you can see the segmentation in the 3 body parts there, which is why it's tri meaning 3, right? So trilobite. So arthropod evolution is characterized by this decrease in the number of segments and an increase in appendage specialization. So unlike the segmented worms in Annelidae, which has lots of segments, these guys have incredible, each segment has been specialized, especially like in the mouth and head region. And the second bullet point here, this Hoxbox genes, we talked about that in our evolution and our mutation unit. And so you may remember the order of the exons or the order of the Hoxbox genes matters. And so if going from our DNA to RNA, we got the antenna, exon, jaws, segments, yada, 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 all the way through there. And if we were to turn around my stool here, and if this was our wild type, this is our wild type exon here. So this would be, let's go antenna, and just for kicks and giggles, we'll keep it simple with our legs here, okay? And so if I was to flip these two exons, all of a sudden my leg would be coming where my antenna is, and my antenna would be coming from my leg just by mixing these two exon positions. We've done this in Drosophila, so those fruit flies. We've mutated their genes, swapped these around, and out of their antenna, what would be their antenna is the leg, and out of a leg should be an antenna. So pretty neat and important aspect or region there of this Hoxbox genes. So you can see the origin there in arthropods, and that really just allow for further specialization in each of these exons, each of these gene regions in the antenna, in the jaws and legs, etc. So one of the reasons for our success, there are 6 of these, is that they have a very versatile exoskeleton. So the sow bug or the roly-poly or pill bug, whatever you want to call these guys there on the right, top right, to the black widow that I mentioned earlier in the film. Some are very hard. Some are exoskeletons so hard that it's physically impossible to drive a nail through them. That's how hard and tough those exoskeletons are, to some being very soft, like these spiders here. Very efficient locomotion. So for the first time in the animal kingdom, so far the only terrestrial animals that we've had are snails and slugs and the mollusk. We have some worms that are able to crawl around, but for the most part, these true terrestrial on top of the soil there, just snails and slugs. And so you can imagine the efficiency from crawling on my belly to now having actual legs and appendages that I can crawl, I can run, I can scurry, I can burrow. Whole lots of different roles open up to us. Another advantage is that the airs are piped directly into their cells. So on the sides of their bodies, they don't necessarily breathe through their mouth like we do. They have holes called spiracles that allows the air to be pumped directly into them. Now, there's also some advantage and disadvantage of that, but they no longer essentially have to have lots of mucousy, moist tissue like the snails and slugs with their gills to allow the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen. The last one, or fourth one, is highly developed sense organs. So these guys are incredible in the advantages, especially in the antenna. To think about, I'm flying through the air and I'm able to pick up a pheromone that essentially a female or a male is emitting. That's just an incredible thing about the amount of sensory information that has to be processed and in turn essentially internalized to figure out who am I, where am I at, and what am I after. Very complex behaviors. We'll look more specifically at that from some socialization aspects to different defense mechanisms. And probably the one that we're most familiar with is metamorphosis, which means the great change or a complete change, especially in the larval stage, right? So looking at the exoskeleton specifically, we're going to see that externally they're not enclosed by living tissue. So they have essentially keratinized their skin, or their exoskeletons may remember is made of chitin, chitin. It looks like it's pronounced chitin, but it's chitin. And this just provides incredible protection, an incredible waterproof layer as well. So now for the first time, I'm not solely dependent on living next to a water source. So I can go into the desert. I can go in regions that have periodical rains, right? I'm not so tied to a water environment, which just opens up a lot more opportunities for diversity and plants and etc. So these modifications here also allow for muscle attachments. So for energy storage, think about the energy storage required to fly, right? So not all arthropods fly, but for those who do, think about the amount of muscle and the amount of energy reserves it must take. Sensory receptors, bristles, gas exchange. So again, just very extreme diversity, from very soft and permeable to, again, hard where I can't even drive a nail through it. Between segments, the body appendages are thin, which will aid in that flexibility. So imagine if it wasn't, we'd kind of be like the Tin Man who's rusted up, or we're essentially waiting on an oil can to essentially move our body. But for these guys here, they've adapted to, at the joint where the appendages joint is a lot thinner to allow for more flexible and fluid movement. And disadvantage to this, as they grow, they have to molt, right, which is one of the synapomorphies in this phylum, to allow for growth. So as they grow, these instars, so each larval stage is typically called an instar. As I go from larval stage 1 to larval stage 2, I've got to molt. I've got to shed my skin and grow, right? But the downside to this type of exoskeleton is it's relatively heavy. So unlike our internal bodies, which is made of both compact and sponge bone is, again, typically at the periphery of our bones, which decreases weight, etc., and allows for us to kind of grow from our tips. These guys have to grow essentially throughout, and the exoskeleton is relatively heavy because there are essentially no soft spots in this exoskeleton, which in turn just limits the size that these scorpions or spiders or whatever can go. So as it stands right now with the oxygen concentration the way that our Earth is right now, we don't really hypothesize that insects are going to be suddenly getting larger like they were back in the Cretaceous and Jurassic periods, right? Second efficiency here is efficient locomotion, so tagmization. Tagmization is basically a better word definition for these appendages. So they're not necessarily segments, but they're really more of tagmata. And as you can see, each section or each tagma is highly specialized. So this is just in the mouth of a crayfish, right? So instead of just having a jaw and teeth, they have several different parts, each with a specific design and purpose. So the palpure and the mandible is used for crushing food, the maxillae handling, and then they have these little balers. They sit there and move these little second maxillae here, and allows them to draw water in through their gills, as well as walking as well moves their gills in terms of crayfish. So as I mentioned before, so here is a grasshopper. They have holes directly into their skin, much like the holes that we've seen in other organisms for the nephridia, right, where they have removed nitrogenous waste, metabolic waste. Well, these guys have kind of developed that strategy, but specifically for pumping air and exchanging gases in and out of their system. So if you wanted to, this would be cruel, but if you wanted to drown a grasshopper, you wouldn't put its head in the water because it can still breathe. So you could sit there and hold that grasshopper down for hours. As long as its abdomen and its thorax is out of the water, it's fine. Again, that's just incredibly cruel. But that's not how well you're going to drown a grasshopper. It's much more efficient to have the spiracles and air pumped directly into it, as opposed to waiting on the just diffusion of oxygen in and out of the cell through some type of moist barrier. And so if I'm dependent upon that moist mucousy barrier, again, I have to be close to water, like some type of way to maintain that layer. And two, I can't be very thick in that because the oxygen is going to take a long time to get to the interior part. So as of right now, one of the heaviest beetles is the Goliath beetle in Africa that weighs about half a pound, is about the size of my hand. And I mean, that's about as big as we're going to get as of right now, at least, again, with these oxygen levels that we have in our ecosystem right now. So very, very highly developed sense organs. So from the antenna even to the eyes, and we talked about the eyes in the mollusc complex, and these are as well, although in different ways. And so you may have seen about these kaleidoscopes and things like that, and you can kind of simulate that by attaching a bunch of straws to itself with a rubber band, and then looking through a bunch of straws. And so a lot of your insects have what's called ommatidia, which essentially is every little eye spot there collected together. And each little eye has the ability to sense light, dark, and movement. They're not necessarily binocular vision like us. Praying mantis are one example of insects that do have that. But for the most part, insects really can't judge distance all that well, but they're great at collecting light, dark, and also in aiding in movement. Also, they have sensory. So, like your fly, for example, not only has these antennae, but have these little halteres on the back of their hind wings there, or their thorax, that allow the sense difference in air pressure. So when you go to swat at a fly with your open hand, it's sensing the difference in air pressure and is able to evade that predation very quickly. So really, really, really neat sense organs there. So sight, touch, smell. Again, think about flying through the air, being able to pinpoint what is my species pheromone, and then not only that, but where did he or she go in flight to that. Complex behaviors. These guys are just absolutely amazing. You could spend almost an entire day on insect arthropod behaviors here. So just to kind of give you some just some interesting tidbits. So these can be they're very complex, organized activities. So think about the hive mentality of termites and bees. So totally, essentially where a queen is in control and she has workers, and the other females, sterile females, are doing the bidding, working out, and all this kind of things. To some of the more, and personally, I think really interesting, you have these chrysomelids, or these turtle beetles, that just display some remarkable behavior. So one of these down the bottom left here, let me see if I can hide this so we can see better, is this poop shield of all things. So this little turtle beetle sits on top of the plant, so he's not hiding anything from predators or anything, but what he'll do is he'll poop, and essentially he can put that on top of his shell, or he can make a little poop hut, if you will, for him to hide in. So just a remarkable adaptive strategy. I mean, because again, what bird wants to taste poop, right? Some other ones, so like insects here. So for the first time, we're actually seeing some type of parental care. So some insects will lay eggs and lay them on essentially some type of structure and carry them around on their back. So you may have seen some type of spiders do that. There's other insects and beetles who do that. This little guy here, what he's doing, he's taking his molted skin and essentially forming like a little spear. And this would be a male here. And I know he and another male will essentially take their modified lances or spears and like try to, duke it out with each other for a female. It's just crazy things to think about that some of these insects are doing that we just kind of walk on by and a lot of times don't even notice. So a really interesting read if you're interested in this. So here's the article from Turtle Shell to Poop Umbrella by Leslie Mertz from 2016. And again, an interesting follow on Twitter is the Entomological Society of America. So capital ENTSOCAMERICA, Entomological Society of America. Very interesting and some good things to follow on Twitter if you're into that. So the last reason why, or one of the last reasons why insects, arthropods are so successful is that they've been able to limit intraspecific competition. So let's break this down. Word intraspecific. So what's this, again, one of the prefixes we see a lot, intra. So intra with an A is within my own species or population, right? So I'm eliminating or limiting competition within my own species. A great example of this is our butterflies. So here on the screen is a monarch butterfly. and it's going to town. The larvae just eat all day long. I mean, it's crazy how much they could consume in a short amount of time. But they're eating the very hardy leaves and trees. But after they come out of their chrysalis and morph into a butterfly, the adult butterfly is not eating the hardy leafy structures of the plants. They're now drinking and eating nectar of milkweed plants, which is also why monarch butterflies are poisonous due to the toxins of the milkweed. But again, that's just one example. There are dozens and dozens and dozens. And honestly, a reason why insects have been able to become so diverse is because that essentially larvae and adults and other even species within the same genus and family have been able to specialize on different parts of a plant. So in a corn plant, you may have one eating solely in the roots. You may have one just in the stem. You may have one in the leaves. You may have in the corn. Another eating the pollen. And it's just remarkable the amount of specialization that comes with the insects and arthropod diversification. So again, this is a great strategy, this metamorphosis there, to go through this complete change, right, between or after. So awesome. All right, so here's a couple questions to kind of pause the videos and think about. So what is metamorphosis and why has it contributed to arthropod success? And then the second question, what phylum is most closely related to the phylum Arthropoda? So you may have to go back to your phylogenetic tree to get that answer. So pause the video, answer those, and then we'll be right back. All right, so hope you were able to pause video and kind of get that. So lots of potential answers here, but again, the greatest being that, again, it limits that intraspecific competition that we just talked about, that there's the adult food source and the larva or the kid food source is completely different, right? So think about that in our life is, so my 2-year-old son, he'll eat Fruit Loops and Pop-Tarts. I'm not going to eat Fruit Loop and Pop-Tarts, so I know that's his Pop-Tarts and Fruit Loops. I don't know him. I'm going to have ham sandwiches and whatever, right? So we eat different things. That just helps everybody get along. The phylum most closely related, that's the nematodes. That's those parasitic roundworms that we talked about a few phyla ago. So let's look more specifically at the major groups in arthropods, and we're going to look at subphylums, right? So the phylum Arthropoda, underneath or in between King Philip Came, so Kingdom Phylum class, there is a subdivision called subphylum, and we're going to look at 6 of these. So the first one being Trilobite. These guys are extinct now, but they're kind of cool in how they kind of set the stage for this. The Subphylum Chelicerata, so that's going to be our spiders and ticks and horseshoe crabs. Some of these species are still around. Myriapoda, which is going to be our centipedes and millipedes, crustaceans, lobster, shrimp, crayfish, crabs, and then finally Hexapoda, which will be your 6-legged creatures, right? Mainly the insects, but this does include a few different orders that aren't technically insects, which we won't get too specific into that. So let's look at trilobites there. So again, tri means 3, and lobus is lobe. So there were 3 lobes, and it's kind of clearly able to see here. 1 lobe, 2 lobe down the middle, and 3 lobe down the right. So we believe, again, that these were mostly marine, shallow equestrian type of animals, but again, these have gone extinct, but again are a nice example of early arthropods that we have there. So again, not much to talk about there for as far as exam or test region goes. The next big one that we'll talk about, and this is the last subphylum we'll talk about in this video, and we'll talk about the other 4 in the next video. This one here is Chelicerata. And so Chelicerata are your mites, your ticks, your spiders, and scorpions. So ticks, mites, lice, and things like that, they're not insects. They're arthropods. They're Chelicerata. And there's a big difference in between the 2. If you don't believe me, just count the number of legs. For most part, we'll give it away. So Chelicerata have what's called a cephalothorax, which is basically where we fuse both the head and the thoracic region, right? They have 6 pair of appendages. You may think, okay, oh, look at that, they had 8 legs. Well, that's true, but that's not necessarily true for all. So we are better off saying 6 pairs of appendages. So if we count, they got 4 pair of walking legs, 1, 2, 3, 4. They have pedipalps, and they have chelicerae, or most people call it, especially spiders, these fangs, right? So the cephalothorax here again, as you can see with the eyes, and there is no essentially clear segmented line that you see in insects, for example. And then, of course, the abdomen. So the abdomen is where essentially most of your visceral organs and organ systems will be held. So like reproductive, digestive, excretory. We'll look at anatomy of a spider, here in a minute, but we're not going to be concerning ourselves getting too deep in the weeds in a spider's anatomy. We'll focus more exemplars in crayfish and in the grasshopper. So the appendages of the cephalothorax, so again, you have the pedipalps, essentially would be like if we had essentially like movable, if I could grow like catfish whiskers, movable whiskers that I can move and sense and kind of feel there, and then as well as the chelicerae, which would be the fangs. So the pedipalps are for sensing, helping to aid in feeding, and the chelicerae there is just for the crunching, the chewing, in some cases the sucking there, right? So 4 pairs of legs, no antenna. So if I don't have antenna, how can I sense information? Well, again, that's where those little pedipalps come in handy. Most of these animals do suck liquid from their prey. So again, if you've seen Charlotte Web, you know that story already. Spiders, ticks, and scorpions, most of these are predaceous, and they've got a lot of different ways to do that. Some are web, some are burrow. Most, as I said, are harmless to humans, especially down here in the southeast. But there are a couple spiders that we need to be weary of. That's the brown recluse again. Look at that little brown violin on the cephalothorax. These are about the size of a quarter as well, so just so you can have some frame of reference if you see those. And then, of course, the black widow, which is, again, that black spider with that red hourglass figure there. So scorpion sting can be very painful and dangerous. Most scorpions, though, we don't really have any, maybe some in Florida. But here in Tennessee, we don't really have any of those to worry about. But again, most are that I've come in contact with, even in like some of the tropics, they're pretty docile. They're not going to mess around too bad. But of course, if provoked, they can sting and pinch. Ticks and mites there are the major cause for spreading diseases. So here is a micrograph of a dust mite that's going to live in your pillow, your couches, and things we don't like to think about. But they're there. They're just having a ball right now as we speak. So, yikes. Lyme disease, so Arkansas traveler's disease, Legionnaire's disease. We got to watch out for these with mostly by ticks, right? So more on spiders here. So again, here's the anatomy of a spider. I don't want to spend too much time, or you spending too much time concerning with the anatomy of a spider, but I do like to show that it is a very complex organism inside there, right? From pumping from the heart to the digestive gland. I mean, it is a very complex organism. It's no roundworm. There's nothing more than just reproductive and digestive system. So again, predaceous, mostly on insects, right? I think some good things to clear up about spiders, and spiders get a bad rap a lot of times. So one of the spiders we have around here is called the granddaddy longlegs or daddy longlegs. It's better known as the harvestman. In some places may call it that. We've always been told around here that the granddaddy longleg is the most poisonous spider, but their fangs are too short. That's just not even true, not even close to that. So don't let people, if you hear that, just kind of kindly correct them. Like, no, these guys don't even have venom. So no, they're not. So spiders, like most arthropods, are dioecious, meaning in separate sexes. So they have some mating habits, some very weird mating habits at times. Again, pheromones there, so chemicals emitted into the surrounding place. They have some have some weird rituals where essentially female webs makes a web, and the male spider will kind of pluck a string or a couple strings trying to make a specific pattern and or think almost like a love song, right? Because all sound is just frequencies of sound at different frequencies. And if the female spider likes his love song or his pattern, then she will allow him to mate with her. If not, there's a good chance he could get eaten. So a lot's at stake for the male on playing the right song. Males can also build small webs to deposit the sperm, and like I said, they'll collect that sperm in a cavity in their pedipalps, which is again, so basically they're carrying a little small web, excuse me, a sperm in their mouths, and their pedipalps have an ejaculatory duct, which is just crazy to think about. That essentially, from there, that they're not ejaculating where you think where their reproductive organs would be, but they're going to be essentially ejaculating from their head region, and it's going to insert that pedipalp into the female genital opening, and then essentially deposit his sperm into the female. So here is a wolf spider. Believe it or not, a lot of people will confuse this spider with the brown recluse. So here's just a wolf spider preparing her egg sac. Again, you may have seen this spider here. She'll have her egg sac. She'll carry it around, and then when they're ready to hatch, the little baby wolf spiders will just crawl all over. And so some people will have reported stepping on these, and then when they step on them, lo and behold, all these spiders come out, and people get a real scare out of it. So, but again, wolf spiders, they're harmless. They can't hurt you. So, brown recluse again, look at the brown violin on the cephalothorax. Let's look at what happens when a brown recluse actually bites us. So, these carry a necrotoxin, which necro being hemolytic, so it's going to actually kill the tissue surrounding it. And so, very stereotypical there, dark spot in the middle, surrounding tissue inflamed and on fire. So here's day 3. We'll watch this guy's progression for a couple weeks. So spider bite there on the knuckle of the thumb, dark spot there, surrounding area is inflamed and definitely hurting at this point. Day 4, more swelling. See a little bit of the pus beginning to occur there. Day 5, again, more swelling, a lot more irritation. Day 6, even got some necrosis tissue, so it's killing the red blood cells, bursting the red blood cells in and around the thumb area. Day 9, I don't know why this guy waited 9 days to go to the hospital at this point to get sutured up, but he did. Day 10, again, just more necrotic tissue and going back to parts extending back toward the hand there. So basically in 10 days' time, this brown recluse essentially was able to, that necrotoxin was able to essentially kill lots of red blood cells in and around the thumb region and cause lots of damage there. So no, not to worry. Actually, he'll make a full recovery and have full movement of his hands and things like that, right? So yes, it hurts, but it's definitely not life-threatening. So with that, that's going to conclude this first part of our arthropod video. So keep watching and look forward to seeing you again in part 2. Just gotta stop the video.